Hi friends, are you thinking about switching from your dairy milk to plant-based milk? It's hard to give up dairy, but if you have diabetes, prediabetes, or are concerned about your blood sugars, then you should know that dairy protein and whey protein, they have an unusually high insulin index, meaning it triggers a disproportionately strong insulin response, even though its glycemic index is low. Now, if I've just confused you with a bunch of words, then I can summarize it for you into 2 words: weight gain. Dairy is beautifully designed to help you gain weight. After all, that's why a calf drinks it. It is designed for them. The more weight you gain in fat, the higher your blood sugars will be. So then which non-dairy milk would be better? Now, if you Google the question, Google AI recommends unsweetened almond milk due to its low carbohydrate content. Healthline suggests you drink a variety of plant-based milks without added sugar. The American Diabetes Association, they recommend low-fat, skim, or non-fat dairy milk, or reduced fat varieties of non-dairy without added sugar. So who's right? Well, it's not so simple. ChatGPT gives probably the most reasonable answer. It depends on what you mean by better: nutrition, taste, sustainability, or how well it works in coffee or cooking. So I'm going to focus on nutritional content. Now, if you want to know which milk I prefer to drink, I'll tell you in the end. First, let's talk about dairy milk and the different types of nutrients found in a different variety of dairy milk options. Here is a typical milk selection that you will find in your local supermarket. By the way, have you ever wondered why cow milk is so dominant when cows aren't native to America? And do you know who brought the first cow over? That was Christopher Columbus. He may not have been the first to discover America, but he brought cows in the 16th century. And since then, immigrants have raised their cattle for meat and dairy to feed their families. And it took about 300 years later before the USDA got involved in the dairy industry to enforce sanitation and hygiene practices, which is relevant to my area of expertise. And you should be concerned because it could affect market prices. When I was young, my mom encouraged us to drink milk. To her, it was liquid gold, the epitome of liquid nutrition. She never had access to milk in Taiwan. In fact, cows are not even native to Taiwan. And for most of the 20th century, people were so poor in China and Taiwan, nobody could afford to drink it anyway. There isn't even a Chinese word for cheese. Now, my mom was partially correct. I admit dairy is very nutritious. It's a very nutritious liquid, high in quality proteins, minerals such as calcium and phosphorus, hormones, and other ingredients that can make a baby grow really fast, including humans. So if you're a young kid, you're trying to grow, right? So it can be very nutritious, especially if you have no other food. And during her generation and before her, people were starving. Now today, most of America are not starving of calories. They are overfed, except for maybe the elderly where their appetite declines. And many of them, they don't eat a variety of foods to get all their essential nutrients. But for the rest of us, really most people, adolescents through most of adulthood, there is a potential harm when people consume milk in excess. Now, the USDA Dietary Guidelines for America recommends 3 cups of milk daily, which is a crazy amount of excess calories that have been shown to have a variety of harmful side effects. First of all, everyone now is trying to cut down on sugar. Milk is liquid sugar. There's like 12 grams of sugar in a glass of milk, and that's why it tastes so good. It's sweet. Most people on earth, though, they will learn that their gut can't tolerate dairy because of the sugar lactose, which can give babies dental caries. That's because it feeds bacteria that then ferments and makes acid to give you dental caries. So you make sure you brush your kids' teeth if you're going to give them any kind of milk. And if you've ever experienced lactose intolerance, let me sum it up into 2 words: explosive diarrhea. Obviously, I'm lactose intolerant, and I admit for much of my young adult life, I tried to convince myself that I wasn't. It couldn't be true. There's too many good things that are so delicious made out of dairy. And that was until I was pregnant with my 3rd child. And after I ate some ice cream at a kids camp, I nearly passed out in the bathroom. At that moment, I couldn't tell if going into labor was worse than having explosive diarrhea that cramped my abdomen. And of course, I could have taken lactase, an enzyme that breaks down lactose, but I didn't realize I was going to have a violent reaction. At least I didn't have bloody diarrhea. Milk can cause bloody diarrhea if it's contaminated with bacteria like Salmonella and Campylobacter, which are normal bacteria in cows. And these organisms, they don't harm the animals, because they are a normal part of their microbiome. But they can cause really bad human symptoms like arthritis, heart valve infections, spinal abscesses. I've seen it all as an infectious disease physician. You can even get tuberculosis from cows. I've tried lots of different milks, but I will never try unpasteurized milk. It's like playing Russian roulette with your immune system. And unfortunately, 10% of people who get food poisoning, which isn't a small number, folks, it's over 500,000 people a year, they get lifelong abdominal problems with just one bout of food poisoning. Hence, you can imagine that I nearly freaked out when my son attended a camping trip recently and a parent put raw sausages and bacon next to American cheese to feed the campers. Now, I don't think people realize how easily bacteria can spread. And if you touch a raw egg and then you open your refrigerator door, well, you just pretty much contaminated your entire kitchen after everybody opens and closes the refrigerator and touches every other surface. And this is why people who eat chicken have a higher rate of E. coli urinary tract infections. Yes, chickens have E. coli, just like cows have salmonella. Look it up. So don't lick or eat raw dough or that juice that marinated your meat. And I'm not making this up. People literally do that. And I'm sure you know someone who's done that before. Another immune problem with milk is allergic bloody diarrhea in infants. It's called allergic colitis. The infant's immune system is special. It reacts to proteins in the milk. And 30% of kids allergic to milk are also allergic to soy protein, which means they can't drink soy milk either. My family, like many American families, started with whole milk. And then in the 1980s, after watching all those commercials, we switched to low-fat varieties. I mean, those marketing gimmicks were effective. And when you go from whole milk to 2%, 1% non-fat milk, pretty much sucks in terms of taste. They all taste like watered down milk, but you get used to it, supposedly. I don't know, I never got used to it. I never liked milk. And if you give me a watered down version, it was even worse. The only milk I enjoyed was strawberry or chocolate flavored ones, which are more like dessert. But those turn out to be the worst milks in terms of health, as they are full of added sugar and oftentimes contain artificial flavors and colors. And this is true for most commercially made flavored milks. Avoid them. Doesn't matter if they're plant-based. But I'll show you later how to make a healthier version in the end. Now, people who drink milk, they simply will get more acne. And if anybody who tells you that's not true, go tell them to look it up. In fact, low-fat varieties are worse than whole-fat milk if you want to get more acne. And do you know why? Well, that's because the fat in milk has a soluble hormone called estrogen. So when you're drinking low-fat varieties, you get unopposed androgens that's in the water. It is speculated that when you remove the fat, you're basically removing all the estrogen. And that was supposed to balance the androgens. So skim milk will stimulate more acne. I mean, milk is a liquid hormone. It has to have hormones to make a baby calf grow into a cow that weighs over a ton. And today's cattle is consistently milked while pregnant. So there are even more hormones, such as estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, and other androgens, and insulin-like growth hormone. These are just a few of the hormones in milk. I mean, if you have PCO, breast cancer issues, well, every time you drink dairy, you're getting estrogen, progesterones that stimulate breast cancer. You're getting some testosterone and androgens that stimulate prostate cancer, and you're getting elevated insulin-like growth factors that have been linked to both breast, prostate, and colon cancer. So I'm pretty glad I never liked milk. A few years ago, one of my friends asked if I thought it was a good idea for her daughter to get growth hormone. She wanted her daughter to be taller. If you want your kid to grow taller, dairy milk is it, folks. It is a liquid growth hormone. Kids who drink dairy grow taller because of insulin-like growth factors, which continue to stimulate cells that replicate throughout life if you keep drinking it. But unfortunately, after your growth phase, it's just going to promote cancer growth. And children and adolescents who drink a lot of milk have been linked to getting an increased risk of different cancers, including breast and colon cancers as adults. And in life, there's always a trade-off, especially if you're drinking milk made from a 1,000-pound animal. But, you know, we remember those commercials, got milk? You got to get your calcium, right?
I can see my house.
Got milk?
So many people drink milk for its calcium source. And I admit it is a rich source of calcium. But unfortunately, men who take more than 2,000 milligrams of calcium a day from a combination of food and supplements, they were 3 times as likely to have advanced prostate cancer and more than 4 times as likely to develop metastatic prostate cancer compared to those men who had less than 500 milligrams of calcium per day in total from supplements and food. Did you know that excess calcium can slow or even stop the conversion of inactive vitamin D to its biologically active form? And vitamin D inside the prostate is thought to put a brake on the growth of cancer cell division. Hence, there is even a limit for the amount of calcium you should get.
Hi friends, I am so thrilled that you want to take charge of your health and take charge of your food. Now, I know nutrition can be complex, but it doesn't have to be. And I'm here to support you in this lifelong journey. So if you point your camera app to this QR code, it'll take you to a link for a free handout that I created just for you. And if you like it, if you want to see other handouts, please go to the link in my show notes and then you can leave me your feedback on what I could do to help you in your journey. Okay, back to the video now.
However, you may have heard that milk reduces colon cancer. And that is actually true when you drink it as an adult because it does appear that the calcium in the food decreases colon cancer risks. Luckily for you, there are other ways to get calcium so that you don't increase your prostate and breast cancer risks. And let me circle back to the height issue. The taller you are, the higher your risk of hip fracture as an adult. It's basically physics. I mean, a long stick will break more easily than a short stick. Unfortunately, the longest bone, your femur, follows this physical principle. And this was observed in people. Boys who drink more milk during their adolescent years, they had a higher risk of hip fractures as adults. Roughly 9% for each additional glass of milk they drink in one day. In fact, countries with the highest dairy consumption, like the US, Sweden, and Finland, also have some of the highest rate of osteoporosis. Now, traditional Asian countries, basically poor countries, where dairy has never been a staple, have far lower osteoporosis rates. And for decades, we've been all told dairy is essential to protect your bones because it's high in calcium and fortified with vitamin D. And now we know that's hogwash. First of all, there are better sources of calcium that don't increase your risk of cancer. For example, the calcium in dark green leafy vegetables such as kale and broccoli. There's calcium in nuts such as almonds. But Americans are deeply dependent on the taste and texture of dairy. And the average person in the US consumes over 600 pounds of dairy per year. And it's mostly from milk, cheese, and yogurt. That's over 100 pounds of milk alone per person per year. But as a country, we're actually drinking less dairy overall, but we're making more of it. 26.4 billion gallons that would take 10 hours to flow over Niagara Falls. Our love for animal products, that's going to get us in trouble. We're going to get another global pandemic, such as avian influenza. It's just a matter of time. This year, 17 states have confirmed avian influenza in dairy cattle, including my state, the most populous state in the nation, California, as well as the second most populous state, Texas. And this is a problem because animals don't live by themselves. People care for them. They interact with them. They're not using protective equipment when they interact with them, which means that the avian influenza will infect people eventually. And then they're going to go home and pet their pets, and their pets interact with wildlife, and it's just going to spread more efficiently. Your cat can get pretty sick from the bird flu, so don't let them interact with wild birds. And many of you complain, I like to go off tangent. Well, that's because nothing in life exists in isolation. And when you look at the big picture, then you'll have a more complete understanding of how something affects you, your life, your environment, and your family. If you don't have time to listen to my rambling, feel free to skip to the relevant topics or just read the video transcript. It's probably easier. In an effort to prevent avian influenza from spreading amongst us, milk from cows that were tested positive for bird flu are dumped. They're not allowed on the market for 2 weeks. The thing with cows is when they get sick, their milk gets discolored. You wouldn't want to drink it. And that's the other reason why it's off the market. So when there's enough cattle that get sick, there will be less milk and milk products on the market. I find it interesting that WIC provides low-fat, non-fat milks to children, despite the fact that there's no evidence that removing the fat in dairy milk makes it any healthier. I guess they're trying to limit their calories. The USDA has recommended 3 servings of milk a day since I can remember, and public schools have been required to offer non-fat and low-fat milk since 2010. Did you know that skim milk, non-fat milk, was actually hog feed? It was fed to hogs and never sold to people until after World War II. One person's trash is another person's treasure. However, when it comes to fat content, if you drink 3 glasses of whole milk in a day, the amount of saturated fat in that milk would be equivalent to eating 12 strips of bacon or a Big Mac and an order of fries. That's a lot of fat. And there is so much controversy over saturated fat, and I know some of you guys just love it. Some of you think it's worse than eating refined sugar or starch. Well, actually the data says it's about the same in terms of health damage. So when you overeat saturated fat or refined sugars or starches, you're going to get the same health outcome. And that's why when you eat croissants, high in both saturated fat and refined starches, and sometimes with added sugar, you can double, triple the inflammation and the calories to increase your chances of getting diabetes and heart disease. I find it rather ironic that a lot of skim milk people then go off and eat a bowl of Ben & Jerry's ice cream, full fat. In the end, you're actually gaining more fat than if you just drank the whole milk. You've just split it into 2 servings and then added a bunch of sugar to eat that ice cream. But it's not just ice cream, it's your cookie, croissants, bread, sauces, spreads, and fatty desserts. You know, if they're made out of butter, cream, coconut cream, whipped cream, like what's the point? It's still going to be highly caloric. It's still saturated fat. Might as well drink the whole milk. If you compare them, drinking 3 glasses of whole milk is 450 calories, whereas 3 glasses of low-fat milk would be 330 calories. However, a regular scoop of Ben & Jerry's ice cream has 380 calories, which makes up for the fat removed from the milk and then some. I think this is kind of like people drinking diet soda with their bag of cookie or bag of chips. I had a classmate who did that every single day in high school. Somehow you just feel better doing it because you think you're eating less calories, but in reality, you're not. And ironically, diet soda makes you gain weight even faster because it changes your gut microbiome and you can't fool your metabolism. It's like using a credit card to pretend you have money in your bank. You think you're spending it freely until your credit card statement, and then you realize you just don't have that money to pay it off. Frankly, nobody needs to drink 3 glasses of milk a day, especially if you already have a weight problem, prediabetes or diabetes, or a bunch of acne on your face, or at risk for breast or prostate cancer. I mean, literally millions of people have never eaten any dairy. And by the way, the fat in dairy is not just a source of vitamin D, but it's also a source of vitamin A. So when you switch from whole milk to low fat or fat-free versions, you actually lose those vitamins. You also don't absorb them as well, even if they fortify it, right? Because you do need fat to absorb fat-soluble vitamins. So let's talk about a plant-based milk in case you want to switch or we get a major avian flu dairy crisis and the price of dairy milk goes up. Now, at church, I volunteer the refreshment stand and I noticed that there is always oat milk next to the coffee. I'm not sure why they always buy oat milk, but some people find that oat milk is creamier because it has soluble fiber and it will froth nicely. So it's popular for lattes and cereals. And there's kind of a coffee bar at church where you can, pour unsweetened coffee and then add the milk and they add sugar too. And many oat milks are actually fortified with calcium and vitamin D that is equivalent to milk. Now, this brand also fortifies it with vitamin B12, which is in dairy and not naturally found in plant-based milks. It's interesting that this oat milk says there are 7 grams of added sugar, but there's no sugar listed on the ingredients. Apparently, during the processing, enzymes will break down the oat starch to make simpler sugars like maltose. So that's why you see the term added sugar, but you don't actually see any sugar in the ingredients. Tricky, huh? So let's now turn to almond milk, which is a plant-based milk of choice served in the hospital that I work. Now, nuts are usually a great source of protein, but not nut milks. Almond milk has even less protein than oat milk. It does have a light, slightly nutty flavor, and unfortunately, some have carrageenan, which is an emulsifier that has been linked to inflammatory bowel disease, which, by the way, is on the rise. This is one additive I avoid. And by the way, carrageenan is not just found in plant-based milks. They're commonly used in ice cream, dairy ice cream, chocolate milk, cheeses, and creams. Read your ingredients, folks. Now, some of you prefer the taste of coconut milk. I can attest it's good, tasty stuff. And if you buy this stuff from a can that's super duper fatty, it is bad saturated fat. And I know a lot of cooking shows from vegans and vegetarians think that, oh yeah, it's a plant. Go all out. No, it's bad saturated fat. It will clog your arteries just like butter. So those fake plant butters are fake. Coconut milk is not a health food, folks. Neither are those fake butters and cheeses. It is great for inflammation though. I would rather eat a whole coconut than eat purified coconut milk. And I admit it's very tasty. And if you buy the Americanized version of coconut milk in the refrigerated section, they are still higher in saturated fat than other plant-based milks. They also have gums too, and it's a terrible source of protein. So what is left in the plant-based milk world? Well, there's actually two plant-based milks that are rather good sources of protein: pea milk and soy milk. Pea milk is low in saturated fat and can have 8 grams of protein per serving. However, be careful of the added guar gums. Unfortunately, these companies, they don't list how much of these gums are in the product itself. And these isolated fibers are not benign and can cause gut inflammation. Now, my favorite plant-based milk of choice is unflavored soy milk without any added sugar. They usually have about 7 to 9 grams of protein per cup, which is equivalent to cow's milk in terms of protein. Now, there's also this trend to make your own fresh milks at home with your favorite bean or nut. The thing is, fresh milk, whether that's a nut or bean or soy, they're low in calcium. I drink my milk to get that calcium fortification, and I basically drink a glass a day. The other thing you should be aware of is that soy milk has a natural compound called phytates that can inhibit calcium absorption. So if you're not cooking your soybean well, the two can counteract with each other and make you absorb less calcium. I'm all into nutrient density, so I will go for unsweetened soy milk that's fortified with calcium, vitamin D, and vitamin B12 that matches that of cow milk. And yes, fortified vitamins, they basically need some kind of food binder, and I think the least harmful so far that I can find is Galian gum. I also limit my consumption of plant-based milks because I try not to drink my calories. It's just a good principle to avoid rapid weight gain. And some of you I know are flabbergasted that I would even choose soy. Hey, I'm Asian, and Asian people, we've been eating soy for eons, for thousands of years. It is the most popular plant protein source in Asia. Ironically, a few years ago, right before the events of 2020, I was visiting China with my American colleagues at a medical conference, and I couldn't find any soy milk. They served a bunch of fancy, tasty foods, a lot of meat, but unfortunately, nobody gave me any soy, tofu, or soy milk. And I see how their diet has been changing to model the American diet. In fact, when I was visiting China, their healthcare providers were very concerned that they were having an astronomical epidemic rise of diabetes, which models our epidemic consumption of meat. In fact, a lot of social media influencers, they point out that Hong Kong is one of the longest lived people on earth, and they consume a ton of meat based on the meat data imports. What they don't realize is Hong Kong is a great smuggling city and a portal of entry for a lot of smuggled goods to mainland China. So a lot of that meat is probably not actually consumed by the people of Hong Kong. It's also a tourist city. I am sure YouTube is not available in mainland China, but maybe it's still allowed in Hong Kong. I don't know. So if you guys are watching from Hong Kong and can comment on how much meat you guys actually eat, that would be very helpful. And if you look at the data, China didn't have their diabetes rise before the 1980s. And if you don't remember what kind of diet that was, then pick up this book, The China Study, which was a collaboration of Cornell, Oxford, and a Chinese medical university professor who examined the diets of different rural villages in Chinese people and how Western diets and lifestyles were changing the diseases in Chinese people. And from the book and all this data that I've been reading, I've concluded we all have to eat like peasants. We all have to eat whole food, mostly plant-based, get out of our cars, back onto our bicycles, or walk like people used to do. Because when you live and eat like King Henry or other queens and the wealthy elites, you succumb to the metabolic diseases of excess calories. I know some of you are wondering, what about Mongolians? How come they live so long? They traditionally eat a lot of meat and animal milk. Their diet is very different, and they have been considered on a wealthier diet for a long time. They live a different lifestyle, nomadic lifestyle, compared to the rest of China. But like America, with wealth comes more meat, or in Mongolian families, they already eat a lot of meat. And when they eat a lot of meat, well, they have higher rates of cancer compared to those people in China who predominantly eat a plant-based diet. So when you switch to plant-based milk, it may not be so tasty, right? You may have to flavor it. And I promised you a recipe on how to turn your milk, regardless of whatever milk you choose to drink, into a more naturally flavored, tasty drink. And there are 2 ways to do this. And for those of you who like strawberries or berry flavored, you can always use fresh strawberries, wash them, and then just blend it in your milk. It makes it so much tastier no matter what milk you drink. And on top of that, you're gonna get vitamin C and polyphenols that are great antioxidants. The catch is, if you're having casein protein from dairy milk, well, that may inhibit the polyphenol absorption, so it makes your milk less nutritious. Hence, I prefer to do this with the plant-based milk when I make berry shakes. So another way to make berry shakes is to buy freeze-dried powders. This is blueberry powder. They are actually richer and brighter in color. They can give you the nutrients of a whole berry minus the water content. And so it's concentrated in flavor and sweetness. And I've tried it with all different kinds of powders, from mango to blackberry, blueberries, black raspberries. They make the drinks taste so much better because they're sweeter and they're fragrant. They also help me cover up my greens. Now, whenever I drink milk, I always add green leaves to it. It's an opportunity for me to add green leaves, and it doesn't taste so good. It's bitter. You know, this is how I drink matcha green tea, or how I make my kale smoothie for my family. Berries just have a lot of fiber and fragrance to hide the taste of the green leaves so much better. Because I too struggle, like all of you, to eat my greens, and my family struggles just like you. So I've been thinking about, how do I increase more greens in their diet, no matter what meal we're talking about. America, and then people in general, we just don't eat enough fresh green leaves. And if you think you're doing a good job, well, double it. Chances are you're not eating enough fresh green leaves. And now, I'm a big chocolate fan, and even though I never like whole milk, I love chocolate milk. That's because of all the added sugar. And so when I switch to plant-based milk, I have always looked for one without any added sugar, but it doesn't taste as good. So initially I was drinking chocolate flavored plant-based milk, but there's so much more sugar in that. And they have all different varieties, from almond to soy to pea. And the problem is, the more chocolate they put, the more added sugar they put. I mean, some brands have 14 grams of added sugar. I also don't know the quality of their cocoa powder. And these days, your cocoa powder comes with a lot of heavy metals. So now I just eat one type of cocoa powder because I want the most bang for my buck, the most amount of polyphenol, flavonols, and the least amount of heavy metals. And whether I'm making chocolate milk with plain cocoa powder, or I make my kale shakes, I'm always going to sweeten it with either berries or dates. Let me show you the dates. Between the two, I would prefer to add the berries because of the added polyphenols. And I just use medjool dates. They're like this, dried up. I let it soak in the water for a little bit, maybe 20 minutes. Sometimes you may have to heat it up a little bit to help it dissolve. And you can actually put one of these dates in your coffee. You'll be surprised how sweet it'll get your coffee. But of course, if you just plop the date in, it's not going to emulsify as well. And you got to do a little bit of blending to it, right? So I'm going to show you how I make my plant-based milk with just these freeze-dried powder and the milk. I'm going to pour some in. Hopefully it won't spill it. All right. Okay, this is soy milk. That's my preferred milk. So this is what it looks like when I just poured it in. And I have this frother for my green tea, my matcha tea. I'm going to show you how I transform this milk into a delicious berry smoothie. Okay, ready? So sometimes I use a frother, and sometimes I just blend it, or I put a lid on and I shake it up. This is delicious, folks. Now, of course, if it's not sweet enough, you can always add some dates, and you may need to pre-soak it, or you may need a stronger blender so you can chop it up. Or, you know, sometimes I make a batch and put it overnight. Some date syrup, what I call it. It's not really syrup. It's just basically dates soaked in water. And I do this ahead of time so the soluble fibers kind of dissolve in the water, so it gets softer and the texture is just more uniform, so to help me enjoy my drinks. The other reason why I drink soy, because the casein protein is suspected to be a carcinogen. And I quote, "Casein is the most relevant chemical carcinogen ever identified." That was a direct quote from T. Colin Campbell, who is 91 years old as of this year. It's interesting that Walter Willett and T. Colin Campbell, they both came from families of dairy farmers. Casein appears to elevate insulin-like growth factor 1 in people. It appears that when you elevate insulin-like growth factor 1, it drives tumor progression. So if food can drive progression, maybe the lack of food can reverse it. There's actually a case report described in people fasting who have reversed follicular lymphoma. Here's a case report of a woman with stage 3 follicular lymphoma who underwent a medically supervised 21-day water-only fast, followed by minimally processed plant foods free of added sugar, oil, and salt. She actually became cancer-free and remained cancer-free for 3 years, confirmed by CT and PET scans. Now, I don't know if this was a coincidence or if this was divine intervention, but I do know that if you remove toxins that are driving your immune system to go haywire, and if you can figure out how to stimulate immune systems to help you fight cancer, it can help people tremendously. Since in the center at which the initial patient participated in has been supervising fasting and has published a follow-up paper on this particular patient as well as 2 other patients who both responded positively under their care. Now, these patients had special circumstances in which they were supervised. They were supplemented with essential nutrients during their water-only fast. So it's really not water only. They had supplements. So this is not something you should try on your own because there are consequences to fasting the wrong way. And if you want to learn more about fasting, watch the next video.